Great. Thank you for joining us today for our discussion on finding funding and how funding works for commercialization. We've got a wonderful panel of faculty that have struggled and succeeded at moving their research from the lab to a commercialized product, entering the business world. We also have a reviewer from the America's Seed Fund who's going to give commentary and insight into some external funding sources. And we really want this to be hitting on everything from the most basic. You know, I know that for some of us, moving from the lab, thinking about taking something in the lab and moving it outside is a bit of a foreign concept. So if you don't even know the basics, that's okay. That's why we're here today. We're going to cover all of that. Just a couple quick notes. One, we're going to ask that you mute yourself. We're going to start with some directed questions at the panel, and then we'll have time at the end for you, the audience, to ask us questions, not us, the panel, questions, and to kind of get your specific questions answered. Please feel free to drop those in the chat at any time whenever they occur to you so you don't forget about them. I will be monitoring the chat and jump in if I need to, but please drop them in there. Yeah, I think that is most of what I have to say. So I'm going to pass it over to our moderator for today, Katie Hemphill, who is the Director of Technology Ventures and Talent Network at CRI.
Thanks so much, Vance. Fabulous to see everyone today. I appreciate you joining us. As Vance said, I'm Katie Hemphill, and I am the Director of Technology Ventures and Talent Network at the Center for Research Innovation, also known as CRI. How I'd like to begin the conversation today is provide the panelists an opportunity to share a bit about their background, what the perspective is that they'll bring to the table in today's discussion, and then we'll kick it off with some directed questions to start. As Vance said, you're more than welcome to throw questions in the chat as you think of them so that we don't forget them later. We will take those towards the end of the panel discussion. So without further ado, Leila, I'd like to hand the virtual mic over to you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be participating in this panel. So my name is Leila Deravi, and I'm an assistant professor at Northeastern. I work on broadly looking at color in biology, and about a few years ago now, so in December 2019, PhD student who had just defended her thesis in September 2019 actually with me spun out a company that was kind of catalyzed into a pre-seed round of financing. So we had money right out the gate once we incorporated the company in December 2019, and have since received about 400,000 of non-dilutive grants, including NSF SBIR and a few Massachusetts life science grants and a Johnson & Johnson sponsored grant. And then we've also now raised close to 4 million total. So it's 400,000 non-dilutive, and then the rest is dilutive through venture-backed financing. And so the company is called Ceasefire Skincare, and it's a sort of a bio-inspired, eco-friendly skincare line that's designed to really overcome some of the major shortcomings in the skincare industry.
Great, thanks so much, Leila. Sunny, would you like to introduce yourself and your perspective next?
Sure. Like Leila, I'm also faculty in the chemistry and chemical biology department. I was very fortunate, similar to Leila, had a wonderful student, Amisi Sadiki, was served as a co-founder with me for our company, Neura Biosciences. What we do is using a protein pharmaceuticals that can be activated by light, or near IR activation. That's the essence of our company. We were very fortunate to receive a VC Series A funding. So I can tell you how lucky we were. We're happy to have that. Separately, I have received non-diluted funding for STTR, also applied and failed to get SBIR. So that's something I can share with you. I think Katie wanted me to talk a little bit in the beginning about the Spark Fund, which is supported by CRI, which is a wonderful program. Not only has, the money is good, it's $50,000, but the application process is really a guideline for how we think about plan our company. That's a separate project. Also, during the review process, we got really very good feedback from the reviewer. One of the suggestions we took is actually, instead of collaborating with another third party outside the institute, we actually try to do something, leave the actual work ourselves. So this way we don't dilute our IP. Also, we don't have to deal with a negotiation with a third-party IP. So that's a wonderful program, Spark Fund from CRI.
Thanks so much, Sunny. Appreciate the plug. Jan, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yes, yeah, my name is Jan Skersetat. I am wearing also two hats. On the one hand, I'm CEO and co-founder of the medical device company Perception, which offers vision diagnostics. And by this, I mean a computer-based vision diagnostics, which will change the way how currently eye examinations in eye care clinics are being done. On the other hand, I'm also a researcher and a postdoc here at Northeastern and the psychology department. And as an effort of the ideas and inventions we created throughout the pandemic, the PI and co-founder Peter Becks and I have founded our company last year. And I will speak today in part about that journey within the university and its network and its resources. And also I can speak a little bit about how it is when you are sitting in the front seat of a venture. So that's certainly something very interesting coming from a research background.
Thanks so much, Jan. And Eugene, would you like to do your intro next?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. So my name is Eugene Buff. I recently joined the Health Science Entrepreneurs at the Bouvier College as the entrepreneur in residence. So if any of your projects have something to do with biology or health science, we will have definitely a conversation separately, and I'm looking forward to meeting you. But my background is I am coming from the academic science originally with a couple of degrees, but for the last 3-4 years, I've been doing a lot of innovation, commercialization assistance, and business development consulting. And that does include to be on the review panel of many grant organizations. And I do know the SBIR inside out was running several commercialization assistance programs, and currently serving as a reviewer on the NSF panel. So I will be able to give a little bit of the both sides of the curtain information, and happy to answer your questions.
Thanks so much for these intros. This helps us set the stage a bit for today's discussion and lets you know who it is you're going to hear from as we continue the conversation. Eugene, I'm going to hand the virtual mic back to you now to provide a very brief overview of the difference between dilutive and non-dilutive funding for commercialization, because I want to be sure that everybody on the call is aware about both options as we begin our conversation.
Right. No, thanks, Katie. And that's important so that at least we have the similar understanding of what we're talking about. Unfortunately, I should say that I don't share Ben's optimism that we will cover everything. So I'm afraid that we will just touch on some of the topics. So we're expecting to have many more questions after we're done. So please do follow up with it. But I usually try to start a lot of definitions from the alternative, right, backwards. So if you are getting funding for one of your projects to a company in exchange to any parts of the ownership or equity, that would be the dilutive funding. Okay, so this is what we're not talking about today. And that would include all those venture capitalists, most of the angel investments, and a lot of the friends and family investments that you could consider. So what is included in non-dilutive, which is, again, I sometimes talk about the free money. It's almost easy to look at this. This is free money we're talking about. And that includes a lot of grants. So there are a lot of different grant agencies, starting from the federal one that I guess we'll speak mostly about. But you already heard from Leila that there are state grants, there are city grants, there are foundation grants. Companies have some grants that they offer. So the grant world is much bigger than just the federal government. But don't forget that there are also bank loans, tax credits that could also work as the non-dilutive funding. And another two things I want to mention is that actually the licensing and royalty revenues from other products in the company are also non-dilutive funding. And the reasonably new things that also, I don't know, we probably will not have time to touch at all is the crowdfunding. So there is a good opportunity to start up the crowdfunding campaigns, and that most of the time is also going to be non-dilutive, meaning that you're not giving away any control or any equity of your project or company.
Great, thanks so much, Eugene. Fabulous start. So to hop right into the conversation, now that we've kind of set the stage between non-dilutive and dilutive funding, we will focus a lot of today's conversation on our non-dilutive options, or that free money, so to speak. Free money does come with a lot of reporting situations that you must adhere to in order to maintain that free money status. And so we'll talk a bit about what that all looks like. But to begin the conversation, I'm going to hand the virtual mic over to Jan to talk a bit about the give a bit of an overview and talk about the impact of both financial and advisory services available at Northeastern through this internal ecosystem, just so that you're aware about what's available to you right here at Northeastern.
Thanks, Katie. You were just broken up for a few moments, so I understood right that I'll speak about the Northeastern related funding sources. Is that correct?
Yes, perfect.
Good. Give me a sign if I break up. So perhaps for context, we started our company last year in July, and within the medical realm, we have basically 3 challenges. There's the product and development, which every startup goes through, and obviously the business development, and in addition, the FDA regulatory hurdles we have to jump over. So for us, therefore, it is important to validate our tests in order to get access to market via FDA. And the funding sources here were very helpful within the university, both in terms of prototype development, which would be here the Alpha grant, which I could refer to within the university network known as the Mosaic network, where various parties offering various services, both in terms of funding, as I just mentioned, the Alpha grant. Another funding source would be the Gaap Initiative. And in addition to the, let's say, the check, these funding sources also offer, and we've heard this already alluded to earlier, a certain guidance at the beginning, especially when you're first-time founder and first-time CEO. You may not know the things you have to do and the particularities within your niche or also outside of your niche. And these networks help you also to clear your idea, your business idea, and to propose a very directed idea which gains revenue. So next to the Spark Fund, which was obviously mentioned before, there, which is again in the same spirit, you would get funding in order to develop your product and show proof of concept. We have other sources which will monetarily support you in that efforts, namely here the Alpha grant, which is up to 2 fundings, and the Gaap funding, which could be up to 3 times $10,000 per cycle. So this is very, very helpful, both obviously in order to develop your prototypes, but also in order to specify and focus your product development at the very beginning.
Great, thanks, Jan. And Erin, thank you for dropping a couple of links to different resources in the chat for us. As Jan mentioned, and as Sunny mentioned earlier today as well, the Center for Research Innovation does run a Spark Fund. This is non-dilutive grant opportunity internal to the university. You can get up to $50,000 per time that you apply, and up to $150,000 to advance a tech or suite of techs over a 3-year period. So you can apply for up to $50,000 per year to advance the same tech or suite of techs towards commercialization. You do not have to commit to starting a company to apply for the Spark Fund, as long as what it is you're working on is working towards commercializing what it is you're researching and bringing what it is you have happening inside of your lab outside to the greater good and public. The point of this fund is to help increase societal and economic impact, and we want to help you do so through this fund. So there are a couple of links in the chat that link to this opportunity in particular to start. Note that applications are open now. They are open through August 3rd, and we are accepting early applications through July 6th. So in the event you haven't applied before and you do want to receive some early application feedback prior to final submission, please feel free to shoot us a submission through the Spark Fund link prior to Wednesday, July 6th. Do all co-founders need to be NEU student or faculty? I just saw this come through. A faculty must apply for the Spark Fund. You can apply for the Spark Fund and use those funds to ensure that you can keep your lab operations ongoing for the specific project that you propose through the Spark Fund, but the faculty PI does have to be the one that applies for this grant or whose name is on this grant when you hit submit on that application. Great. Next question I wanted to cover here was issue of timing when we start a company and or attempt to work towards commercialization as a researcher. So we wanted to be sure today that folks are very, very aware about the time it takes and the time that needs to be allocated to apply for these kinds of grants when attempting to commercialize a tech or suite of techs or working towards spinning a company out of your lab. So to begin with, I'd really like to hand this over to Sunny as well as Leila to talk a bit about what it took for them as faculty members to enable and empower the students that were in their labs to work towards commercialization as opposed to be working solely on research happening inside of the lab. Sunny, would you like to start?
Yes. So as I mentioned, I think this is a fun part of being a professor, right? I really have the student who eager to learn different things. And also from a very selfish point of view, my student graduated, go to work at Takeda, other company, right? That's great, but you miss all the great students. I actually have my student co-found a company, we still work together. So that's actually really fun part of being a professor, you still work with good students. I think it really depends on the student, take lots of time. And I was very fortunate to have not only at MISI, actually several other students interested in entrepreneurship. Some focus more on the business side, some more focused on the science side. That's, everybody integrate together. So we have on campus, I think Yan mentioned before, we have a innovation, NSF Innovation Corps, I-Corps program, and there's some other virtual mental network. Katie was leading that before. So those programs, I don't remember whether student can sign up for themselves. We always work as a team, right? So my student and myself work as a team. Some grants, I think students have to apply themselves, not the faculty. In any case, those are wonderful programs to have on campus. So one thing I want to mention is not only the money, those grants tend to be smaller, perhaps, but sometimes good for the student, right? Get some support, travel. Again, just like everybody said, it's really let people know that you have this interest. So for example, Erin Cram, our associate dean, often drop me an email, say, Sunny, here's opportunity, right? You haven't heard about before. And so she remembers what I do, several projects. So this is the perfect, not only have the student training, but have this network, okay? So I'll give it to Leila. I think she has lots of experience as well, working with students on various programs.
Thanks, Sunny. Yeah, I think you rounded that up pretty well. Just to add, I guess maybe to personalize my experience. So I had a PhD student, like I mentioned. So she was in about her 3.5 years to started 4th year in the PhD program here in chemistry. And she, well, I think probably what happened was that we kind of were having conversations informally within our global network in the Boston area, actually, and had a lot of inbound interest on our technology and what we were doing in the lab. So that means that people were coming to us unsolicited and saying, hey, look, this looks interesting. Oh, hey, look, I saw you talk at some conference and I was very intrigued by X, Y, and Z. And so that kind of gave us the bug that something is happening here. And there's a bigger play to what we're doing on the fundamental science side in the lab. And so actually my student Camille and I identify this NSF I-Corp. We have this program here, which is $3,000 for students to apply, and you get in and you get sort of an experience of being able to talk about research and starting to learn what is a business model, what is a business plan, how do you get something off the ground, what does it take? And we were very naive when we started. We were thinking, oh, this could be something we could do on the side and dabble here and do a little bit of academic research there. And it turned out to become something that was really, really gigantic. And especially as we started talking to more and more people, because once this ball gets going, it goes. And you have to just kind of keep up with it. And you have to make sure you take advantage of all the opportunities that come to you to try to figure out how can you get this off the ground and how can you get this supported. And so I would say that it was probably the I-Corp program there where actually Mark Patterson, who came to see Camille speak, said, hey, look, you guys are onto something. There's a gigantic need in skincare where sunscreens right now are currently being reevaluated by the FDA. And I think you might have kind of cracked it, but this space here is actually, it's called tough tech in the sense that It's almost impossible to get new materials approved because the regulatory process for sunscreens is so complicated. And so actually, because it's so tough to get this funded through fundamental science, and so I will say, I applied many, many cycles for NIH to get this funded, and they each time were like, no. And so we were like, okay, maybe this is not a fundamental science thing anymore, and let's kind of like take this into the company. And we got connected with the Engine, which is an accelerator and venture fund out of MIT, and they fund tough tech companies actually, and they were super supportive of us and were our initial champions in getting this off the ground actually.
That's great, Leila. Thank you. And we'll talk more about the Engine and some of these dilutive funding opportunities a bit later in the conversation. Jan, I'd love for you to now add your perspective as a first-time founder navigating right now, currently, what it is to attempt to launch a company and still be working on research and working at Northeastern, just so that folks are really aware about the time commitment and the dedication it takes to make all of this happen.
Yeah. It is a lot of work. I think no one should be under the illusion that is a 40-hour job. There wouldn't be a postdoc anyways, I would assume. But if you do two things, which I do right now together, this is really a non-stop job. But I enjoy it, and I know for what I'm doing, so it really provides meaning, and I see that it's worth it. But it's just personally speaking, it is a lot of work. In terms of that work component and time management, we talked it earlier. I think it's really important to keep in mind that if you decide to do a venture, that you think clearly about the trade-offs, which is mean in terms of your personal life, but also in terms of your career going forward. I think these decisions shouldn't be taken lightly. So if you decide to go into a full-time CEO position and try to develop a business over years to come, that might, again, has an impact on your academic career. So that's something every founder, especially in the academic science sense, should have in mind. Perhaps the other part might be a little off topic here, but it is also important. As a scientist who is not an MBA student, to make sure that when you enter this world of entrepreneurship, that you begin to learn the language and the concepts and the way how informations are being communicated, which networks are being done, and how network is being done within the business world. It is rather different than in a science conference. And again, I could talk more about this in a different occasion, but I just want to raise awareness that on a personal note, there's a lot of growing and it's very exciting, but it means a lot of time and a lot of careful thinking ahead. And therefore, I really invite everyone who is doing this to reach out to people who have done something like this, to get their take and to speak with as many people as possible to get a better sense of whether this is a good idea, a bad idea, whether it's worth it, and to get a sense where you are with your idea and whether this is for you personally the right decision.
That's great. Thanks, Jan. In talking about time here a bit further, Leila, I'd like to bring you back to the virtual stage to talk a bit about how you decided about which grants you were going to apply for. I know that you received several different non-dilutive grants prior to joining the Engine and going the dilutive route for Ceasefire. And I'm wondering if you can share with the audience how that decision was made, where you were going to spend your time and which kinds of grants you were going to apply for, because I think the audience would benefit from those learnings.
Definitely. And I will say, actually, just to kind of couple on to what Jan just said, it's really, really important for people just starting out in their professional careers to really reflect on, is this something that you want to do? I will say, on my perspective, as sort of a junior level faculty, I've had probably 95% of people I've spoken to told me, Leila, don't get involved, don't do it, you have to focus on tenure, you got to focus on tenure. And so I just want to say that what Jan said is actually probably the most important thing, is that you have to be really passionate and you have to be really dedicated to the cause, because it's really challenging, especially for the early career people, because it sets you off on a different trajectory, which is not very in line with, I guess, the prescription of what academics is. So, and I think we're fortunate in the College of Science to have that type of flexibility now to be able to think about these sort of alternative paths to going forward in your own career. For Katie's question, yeah, so just to be clear, we actually received a convertible note, which is essentially just a check from the engine that says that, look, this is going to convert into equity into your company once you go for your series seed raise, which is the priced round. So that puts value onto your company. So we got this check from the engine that was just kind of a note. So it was just paper essentially at the time, but it was money in the bank. And so we knew that they were going to be on what's called our capitalization table. So they're going to have a stake into the company. And so they kind of let us go, and then COVID hit and we were like, okay, great. We have absolutely nothing right now, but we kind of took that opportunity to really take a close look at what's around and accessible in the Massachusetts ecosystem. So we right off the bat found a really great opportunity from the Massachusetts Life Science Center for the Mass Next Gen Challenge, which is for female founders. And so this was great because I don't know if you guys in the audience know, but only about 1% of all startup companies come from female founders. So it's actually really, really, really important that we as women in the population get out there and start doing companies because we need more representation. So we had this great platform through Mass Life Science Center to do this. And then separately, so Camille, who is the co-founder and CEO of the company, is also a woman of color. So we went after diversity grants as well. So we went through a diversity challenge through the Johnson & Johnson ecosystem. So this is now a national grant, and we applied for that and were awarded that to help support the company as well. And then separately, kind of around maybe like 4 or 5 months in, we applied for the SBIR phase 1 grant from NSF. We're very successful in the first round, and it's all about sort of identifying this unmet need. And we have this team that's a very inclusive team as well. We had a very great broader impacts kind of component of the grant too. And we were successful. So that's kind of how we sort of started building up our safety net, because COVID really was a difficult time to start a company during.
Thanks so much. So helpful. I think the other important note to highlight here is just your network. Growing and building a network of folks who have done it before and or understand the landscape maybe better than you do is really, really important, not only at the federal level with different program directors and managers who you may meet through your process, but also here at the Northeastern community level with folks who have done it successfully before and or haven't succeeded, but received great feedback that you may learn from. I think there's lots of knowledge share and lessons learned to share. Jan, you came off mute. Did you want to add to the comments here?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the network question and how we get together with other people, because I was mentioning this earlier, and I've heard a little bit this out of your point you made. I just wanted to add here that Northeastern has actually an internal network of people who are in the startup founder business, so that's very valuable, but also provides, as you know, Kelly, opportunities to go to actual fundraising and networking events within the Boston area and beyond, to meet other people within your specific niche. And that's very important. You need to have a general overview of how it works, but also you need to have domain expertise and get experience from people who are further down the line within the area you are working in.
That's great. Thanks, Jan. And if anybody's interested in learning more about getting connected with different sort of sponsored opportunities to attend conferences or symposiums, please feel free to reach out to me offline. This is something that we're currently piloting through the Center for Research Innovation. So happy to talk with you further. We got a question in the chat regarding how do you choose between spinning out your own company versus licensing the technology or product to a larger corporation? And I would love for any of our panelists to kind of hop in here and speak to why they chose to start a company as opposed to license to a larger corporation. Sunny, I saw you nodding. Do you want to hop in here?
Actually, my first entrepreneurship was I got $1,000, $700 licensing fee for assay I developed from Washington State University actually that time. Yeah, so that's a very good question. So I think it depends, right? So for example, the assay kit I developed, I can start a small company. The assay kit will never become $1 billion product. We'll probably sell couple of $1,000 per year, or maybe I don't think even reach $1 million, right? So in that case, licensing perhaps is a good way to do it, right? Just you finish it, have a patent, license to someone, just get a royalty. Other bigger, but also some other people want to use a small project as a start of their company. I think there just depends on your your interests and how you manage it. And I think I got this advice from a really good partner of law firm Northeastern have a relationship with, is Cooley, are in the potential center. So I think for the company, he said, there are two ways generally can think about this. One is a lifestyle company. So you do it just like your research program. So it keep you busy, get some financial return, either for your research or just your personal income. The other one is really go for big, right? You know, in our space is drug development, and you have to be diluted, right? You can't raise $1 million yourself, or rarely if you can do that, right? So in that case, you maybe want to just go for quick, the speed, right? Instead of you know, do everything yourself. But go back to your question, what is licensing and what is you do yourself? I think you know, you can decide either way. Sometimes it's very clear cut that is, if the project is not big enough, then you probably just want to license it. Another thing is, if even the project is very big, sometimes it's very hard to find a product. This is what Yang mentioned, is the business side. Sometimes you'll be one component, right? So we have a faculty member here. He will do material science. His invention will be ultimately a product, maybe 10%, 5% of component. So it's very hard for him to break into that space to have his own company. And the most easy way to do it is for him to license to a big farmer, a big company like 3M, right? Do the material, and his invention is part of that, right? So there's sometimes a big business decision that you almost cannot do one, you can only do one way. Sometimes you can do both.
That's great. Thanks, Sunny.
I want to jump in a little bit of Sunny gave a great overview of that, and referring both to Jan and what Leila said. Sometimes you can get some objective information about which path is more viable, but most of the time it is a personal decision. It is a personal decision on what it is that you want to do professionally, because as you've heard already from almost everybody speaking, it's a very tough because there is only 24 hours in a day, and we know how many days in the week. So you just need to decide what it is that you want to do, and at the end of the day, licensing or building the company are the strategic choices that you make as you go forward. And there are a lot of programs like the I-Corps or the support that CRI and we provide that will help you to gather some subjective and objective data on that. But the decision, I think, is still personal.
I agree, Eugene, and I think, you know, it was Jan earlier who brought up passion, and Leila as well, right? Passion for your project and passion for wanting to build a company, as opposed to license something and receive some royalty revenue kind of passively. It's two different avenues, but they're both very, very viable depending on what it is you're working on. And if you have a specific question around that for your research, I would be more than happy to have a conversation with you about this with my colleague Mark Solik, who handles all of our licensing at the Center for Research Innovation, just so that you understand full on headed in what it really means to license tech either through Northeastern directly to a larger corporation versus licensing it yourself as a spin-out company. So to continue our conversation here, we had a question in the chat about venture capital funding, right? So some professional dilutive funding. And Sunny, I wanted to hand the virtual mic back to you here to talk about what it was like to raise a Series A, what that took. Leila, I know that you shared a bit about the engine already, but if you have anything else you want to add after Sunny speaks about raising the Series A, I think that would be really helpful and just kind of broadening our horizon around what it means to have dilutive funding.
Yeah, so it's a kind of dream for all the co-founders in the drug development space get a VC funding, right? That seems almost, I only know one company did not go through that process. They have a wealthy founder, initially rolled a couple $1 million. So it's really, in some ways, very hard. In some way, actually, it's very easy. We're very lucky. We actually started a company during COVID. We did not even meet a VC. We're supposed to go to London to meet a VC in person, but with COVID, we didn't even meet them in person. I still haven't met my VC in person yet. So we got multi-million-dollar. Usually, in many ways, no different than any other project. If you have a good problem to solve, you have a good team, then you have the experience, right, and the commitment to do it, and then people can evaluate that. That's a big part, evaluate that, and then you get the money. In the big VC space, actually in Boston, we're very lucky. There are more money than they can spend. Actually, it's opposite in many other countries. They have Our VC in Boston areas have tons of money. They don't have enough good project. But go back to your question, I think team, I know this kind of a little bit too off the non-diluted funding. Team is the most important in many ways than even your ideas, because you're going to pivot, you're going to change, modify your project. Team is very important. We have 6 co-founders from our company. When we started, we have a founding CEO, we have founding advisors. We have 8 people. Basically, we have every single people we need for a team when we start a company. And some of the people, some are my students, some my colleague, Brian Spring, junior faculty in the College of Science, and his student, Eric, another PhD students, right? So it's really, the team is, that's I think 50% of getting those big funding. Also, the team is not someone also just seems can work together. You really need to have a working experience with each other. You know, for example, Eric and I, we published a paper together, so we know how to work with each other, you know, how we argue, how we debate, right? So this is very important. It's just not knowing people, also work with them in a similar setting like a startup company.
That's really helpful, and I think it's a really important point. Leila, do you want to add a bit about what it means? You touched on it earlier, right? But what it means to have dilutive funding partners and what kind of say they have. We know that you talked about the cap table, they'd be on that. What sorts of decisions are they involved in? I think that would be helpful for the audience.
They're involved in every decision. So that primarily the people who are going to lead your round. So for us, we've raised a Series seed round, which is right before the Series A, which is what Sunny's company is in right now. So they not only do they help assign the value to your company, so that kind of says like how much is this predicted to be worth, but they also have a lot of say on who you bring in. You have to check in with them and get their approval for large purchases. So if we want to do contract testing for our material, we have to get approval. If we want to hire somebody new in the company, we have to get their approval. So we can't do anything on our own anymore, which is totally fine. I mean, it's very much par for the course. I will say that for those of you, I think this question of licensing versus spinouts is really, really important to talk about, because in our experience with venture capital, I think you have to have $1 billion industry that you are trying to target. If you want to go out there and raise money and start a company, nobody's going to support you unless you have the market potential. Because people in venture, you know, they're trying to get a return on their investment. It's all about business and they're looking for a 10x return. So you can't go to them and say, hey, look, I'm trying to solve a really, 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 really important problem. And there's only $100 million market for that, because for them as business-minded people, they're not going to see that the return of their investment is going to be substantial enough for them to start up with this company. So I will say, and if any of you in the audience have any questions about what does it mean to address or assign a total addressable market or your service addressable market, these are things that like you have to bootstrap learning. And I think it's really, really hard, especially as scientists, you like aren't geared to think that way. But it's a lot, so it'll be a lot easier to have conversations about that if you all are interested. But I will say that all of those numbers, like they're like, you know, you throw these numbers, these $1 billion markets out in space, and like, what does that actually mean? But it means a lot. If you want to get any type of like significant finance and capital behind your idea, you have to prove that there is a market for it. And so it becomes actually probably the most important thing when you go out for fundraising, I think, aside from your technology. But everybody on the call is a really smart scientist with great work. So I don't think we have a problem there. It's just about finding the right market.
Thanks so much. I think that's really helpful. And I think I'll throw a reminder right now out to the audience that Northeastern, through the Center for Entrepreneurship Education, does have an NSF iCourse site program, which was mentioned a couple of times on the call already. This is a fabulous opportunity. If you don't want to do all of the research on your own to begin with, and you want a bit of guidance, you want some business mentorship as a part of the process, we highly recommend that you look into that NSF iCourse site program. There is a link in the chat if you want to head to that website and learn more about what's available there. We had a couple of folks on this call who had students take advantage of that program, which further enabled the lab to kind of think through these sorts of business terminology and acumen. And so, I think that that's helpful. The NSF iCourse program. I will also state that the Center for Entrepreneurship Education supports the Alpha Fund, which Jan spoke to earlier, and I think Sunny, you brought it up as well. Post iCore, if you want to continue working towards commercialization, they do provide a bit more money, approximately $10,000 total, to further advance towards commercialization. And then regarding non-dilutive funding internally, again, we have the Spark Fund, which is open right now, which gives you up to $50,000 to think through commercializing your tech or suite of techs, and up to $150,000 total over a 3-year period, but you can apply for up to $50,000 per award cycle. So that's pretty exciting. In our last few minutes here, prior to opening the chat to audience questions, Eugene, I'd love for you to speak to the kind of an overview of America's Seed Fund, the process, the review process, what it takes, time commitment, and what America's Seed Fund is seeking in their applications.
Sure. This is one of those big ocean questions that we will not be able to cover. So hopefully I'll just find some curiosity and looking forward for more questions individually or during the Q&A session. I want to start again to kind of piggyback on a little bit on this the conversation about the VCs, just so that we keep differentiating between the dilutive and non-dilutive. So I think the best way to consider it is just to remember that the VCs are they're very important, they're critical, they're very helpful, but you are not their customers, which means that they're really not doing it for you. Their customers are the people who gave them money. So their job is not to help you to build your company, but to bring the return to the investors. So if you understand the psychology, it will be much easier for you to interact with the VCs, which brings us back to the non-dilutive funding. So the funding agencies and the organizations who are giving you this non-dilutive funding are really interested in you moving forward. This is how everybody gets the reports on their success stories. So what is now called the America Seed Funds is started almost 30 years ago as the SBIR STTR program. I've been with it for last 20 plus years, and almost every 2-3 years somebody's saying that it will be closed. No, it's not going to be closed. It continues to be congressionally appropriated. And there are a few things to remember about it. One is, in addition just to money, this is a huge stamp of approval. This is a highly reviewed and highly competitive program. So if you are getting any of those grants, it's a very honorable to wear it on your sleeve and to mention it everywhere, because that gives very big stamp of approval and a reputational boost for you as a young company. Now, every single federal agency has money appropriated for these SBIR grants. Literally every single agency. So we've heard about the NSF a lot today, but I can tell you NIH, every single institute at the NIH has their own SBIR fund. The EPA, Department of Education, Department of Defense, Department of Agriculture, NIST, every single agency has their fund. Which means that there is a lot of variety that you can look at, and a lot of projects would actually be eligible for not one, but multiple opportunities from federal government. And it's perfectly okay to apply to multiple awards as far as there is some difference. And the technology and the project could be the same, but the application, there needs to be the angle that makes it relevant for that particular agency. Two other things that I want to mention again, just to probably spike the interest. One is that you need to understand the difference between the agencies. So some of them are what's called mission-oriented agencies, and this is going for the EPA, Environmental Protection, the Department of Defense, Agriculture. Those agencies actually issue solicitations specifically for the topics that they're interested to get the proposals for. So you can look it up. Again, one of the good things about federal government is that they must reply to you. So if you have any questions about what they publish or what they distribute, you can reach out to the program manager and they will get back to you. So this is the mission-oriented agency. So when you write the proposal in response to those solicitations, you need to explain how you're relevant for that particular question, right? So if we talk in EPA, so there's for always some cleaning air or cleaning water. If it's Department of Defense, again, there's an ethic lab here, so they always have this like soldier of 20 and now 2nd century probably, or something like that. Now, so these are mission-oriented agencies. Now, there are mission non-oriented agency. They don't have any name, but the NSF, Department of Energy, they are not mission-oriented, which means that they basically fund every project that makes sense. They do have internal kind of separation. So when you submit to NSF, they will send it to, there is a panel on medical devices, there is panel on the kind of more engineering project, there are a panel on the energy project, but you can submit on anything. Look at to those specific agencies where you can fit. Again, they have different structure. For the NSF, for example, right now they have rolling submission, which means that at any point when you have your proposal ready, you can reach out to the agency and get your proposal going. Some others, like the EPA and DoD, they have these specific cycles. The second part that I wanted to mention is that when you write in a proposal, this is a very different proposal that I hope that you already got it from our panelists. These are not scientific proposals. And I know that we all know how to write NIH grants and some other research grants. The science during the review process, the science is almost always considered as a given. Even if there is not enough direct expertise on the panel, we are supposed to look at this and assume that everything you say technically, scientifically is going to happen. But there is much more focus in the review on the commercialization side. That means that all those words that have been thrown around, they needs to be kind of mentioned in the proposal. So you need to understand what the market is, you need to understand who your potential customers are. But even more than that, you need to pay a lot of attention to the impact. Because this is a federally funded programs, they actually, again, as I said, looking forward to help you. So they're much more interested in creating jobs and creating new companies. So it means that if there is a big impact, if everything goes well, and a lot of people would care about the result of your work, that's something that will put your proposal on the top of the pile.
That's great. Thanks, Eugene. Really helpful. I think the other two things that I'll mention here, and Eugene has mentioned these in passing to me before, that I want to be sure we speak about today at a very high level, is one, the process for federally funded grants is IP proofed. So there have been concerns raised by faculty members in the past about their IP, not being protected if they're to apply for different kind of federal grants. Eugene has assured me as a reviewer that the process is IP proofed, and everybody involved has to sign NDAs in addition to other sort of documentation that they're not sharing about what it is you're working on outside of their purview as a judge on the review panel. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to cover that I was asked just today by a faculty member about is who can be the PI on these grants? And the answer to that question is it doesn't have to be you. It doesn't have to be you as a faculty member, right? It could be your PhD candidate, graduate, postdoc that's working in your lab. We just wanted to be sure that you were aware that, anybody in your lab can be the PI on any of these grants.
Katie, I think it's really, this is a really important point, because the PI has to be in the company. So the professor who is not full-time in the company cannot be the PI of this grant. So you have to be full-time in the company.
Right. And we already mentioned another thing that, as we build up this controversial, I would say, topic, because is the time commitment, because this is another place where people are looking. So make sure that the time commitment is realistic, because all those proposals do have this table of how much time the participants are expected to do. So if you have the full professor who is saying that he or she will be 100% with the company, that immediately raises the flag with the reviewers, because again, the reviewers are the people similar to that we have on this panel. And in the audience, so we'll know how it works. So these are the things that get paid attention to a lot.
Yeah,
and there are different. Yeah, go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to what was just been said. If you're right now in a research position, but want to transition, then you can use also the STTR and SBIR as a case to be made. You want to be full-time and to build the company, which is obviously often the case in the science when you have a science-based lead.
And there are different time commitments affiliated with each of the grants, right? So an SBIR is different than an STTR, is different than a PFI or a Partnership for Innovation Award through the NSF. I wanted to bring up this Partnership for Innovation Award through the NSF as well. Thank you so much, Vance. You just threw a link in the chat about it, because this offers folks who are extremely early stage in their process the opportunity to apply for funding for commercialization through NSF prior to incorporating, right? So if you were not ready to incorporate yet, you're still determining whether or not what it is you're working on has legs as its own kind of standalone startup or spin out. This is a fabulous opportunity for you to get a corporate mentor to iterate on what it is or what will become, right, your MVP or your most viable product. And this is an absolute opportunity to get some money to do so, right, outside of Northeastern and outside of that traditional kind of SBIR, STTR model. It is about $1 million in total after 2 phases of awards. And so highly recommend that if any of you are not quite ready for that SBIR or STTR, but still want to explore funding opportunity through the National Science Foundation, check out this Partnership for Innovation Award. Note the next cycle is due as of mid-January. So you all have opportunity to apply. And this past January, we actually had 3 professors from College of Engineering awarded, which was really exciting, through the PFI award. So, you know, big news for Northeastern, and I would love to see additional of our faculty members apply and be awarded PFIs in the future. So just wanted to bring that up. I now want to hand the virtual mic over to Robert Hansen, who's had his hand raised for a bit. Robert, would you like to join the conversation?
Whoops. Yes. I'm in the college in the Department of Chemistry and Chemical Biology, along with Sunny and Leila. And I want to bring up something to complement what they have talked about with regard to starting up your own company or doing licensing. And that goes back to, again, determining what it is that you have as your IP and just what where you're going to fit into the market. And about 30 years ago, I and 3 others, investigators in the Boston area, came up with a diagnostic for Parkinson's disease. Now, it turns out this is something that has a potential market of anywhere from $250 million to $750 million a year. So again, this, you figure out that it's a large market, and that at the time, there were no other agents that were in the market. And so potentially this was a very large opportunity. But again, you take a look at what you're starting off with. Do you have the skills to do this on your own? And the answer is, to take it from start to finish, absolutely not. And so you take a look at what point will you license this? And so again, with licensing, you can do a much better job if you can carry this project as far as you can on your own. And we were able to carry this all the way up through animal studies before this one's licensed. And this is where, again, I think Eugene and all of you will who have done this would agree, is who you license this to, who licensed it, is extraordinarily important. And it has to have expertise and deeper pockets. And this particular agent went all the way to phase 3 clinical trials in 2008. Small pockets indicated that, and they submitted the data to the FDA. Eugene will probably know all about this. FDA said, it's a flawed trial, you have to go back and repeat it. And to do this at phase 3 is extraordinarily expensive. And this was 2008, the market crashed, the company went belly up. All they had was the IP. And eventually, 7 years later, they marketed it off to another company that took it through phase 3 clinical trials. They sold their company off before it finished the trials. And now finally this last spring in March, this was sold to GE Healthcare, who now has deep enough pockets to actually take it through to be approved by the FDA 30 years after we patented it. The university, it was finally settled. There was a lawsuit over failure to do due diligence. I did get a little bit of money out of it, but not nearly what I could have gotten or the university could have gotten had the original company had the deeper pockets to finish the trial. So, you know, again, I love to listen to the experiences that all of you have had in starting it, and everyone has a different story. And I would, again, reaffirm what Eugene has said about SBIR grants. I've reviewed them for 25 years. It's different from writing a scientific grant. And I'll stop at this point.
Thanks so much, Robert. We really appreciate you sharing your business trajectory. There's lots of knowledge share to happen and lots of lessons learned to share. So I'm going to encourage everybody on this call one more time to network within your own internal Northeastern community. There are lots of folks with these stories that you can learn from. In our last few minutes here, Sunny, Jan, and Leila, I'd like us to focus on times that we haven't succeeded in receiving the funding we needed and lessons learned we took that are kind of tangible takeaways that folks from this call can learn from, based on that. Sunny, I know that you mentioned from the get-go about the SBIR. So if you want to begin, that'd be great.
Yeah, first I want to thank Bob Hansen for being a mentor to me on both research, especially on the entrepreneurship. I still remember vividly many conversations I had with Bob in the hallway. I mean, he reviewed SBIR, all the experience he had, right? So as Eugene mentioned, yeah, you can write to a program officer, they reply your email, but there's nothing big. People who are successful, have done review, right? All these small tricks you have, grantmanship, right? Bob have tons of them, talked to Bob Hansen for sure. One thing I think is, I don't want to repeat everything. If I can, I want to inject one thing is about timing. So when COVID hit, the first thing you think about is, we're in the middle of talking about the company, it's dead end, right? People drop everything. But I actually read a book, Bad Blood, if you know that story. That book actually mentioned when economy is bad, it's easier to get VC money because biotech always have the same risk factor. When the money doesn't get good return, other sector, they actually channel to the biotech. So I talked to Amici, said this is time actually we need to focus on getting our company started because if we believe that book and talk to other people, this is actually a good time to get VC money, right? So you can kind of allocate your priority a little bit. So we really tried really hard. We took a 2-month break. After that, we had lots of Zoom meetings, right? And we pushed really hard, and I was very fortunate that. So timing is very important. I need to just talk to people and prioritize your time. Go back to your other question. I think we already mentioned everything. SBIR is the same. Then other grant has a special flavor to it, a special grantmanship to it. And, for example, you have to have a patent almost, or you have a provisional patent, which costs $1,000 to file. But if you don't have that, you don't score very well on the SBIR panel, right? So even for that purpose, you can file provisional patent. Northeastern has been very supportive when we did that, right? So they filed provisional patent. So we score a point checkbox, we have IP protection. So I will stop that. I think the network is the mentorship, like Bob Hansen, other people is so important,
That's great. And mentorship among peers is what you're highlighting, which I think is fabulous. Jan, what's your kind of lesson learned takeaway that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think there are in principle 2 answers to this, right? You submit something, a grant, or you have this VC conversation, or you show prototypes to early adopters. And either they congratulate you and they love this, what you do, you build something what they want, or they were wrong and they didn't get it, and it really has nothing to do with you, or they are onto something. And I think looking through that lens, it is important to see this critical feedback or sometimes negative feedback also as an opportunity to say, to adjust. That is not so different from what we know from the scientific method. But obviously, if you in the business realm that has a different connotation, might be sometimes also differently communicated. But that is something we learned from when we wrote grants. For example, at the very early stage last year, we had a very different focus on our trajectory, go-to-market strategy, and comments on these grants were actually very helpful to refocus and being clearer on how we want to enter the market, in which way, because there are many, in basically every field, with every CEO you'll talk, there are many different ways to enter with your products or product any given market. So you need to make a decision what's the most feasible, and these comments often help to clear your thinking and refine your thinking.
That's great. Thanks, Jan. And Leila, to close the show here for us, what would be your lesson learned or takeaway to share with the audience?
I think my story is probably more so with the venture raises. So as two women going out there into a male-dominated world, and also as people working in skincare, we're already people, the feedback is kind of like, oh, that's fluffy science. And so trying to get everybody on board to know we're working on a hard science problem in this really saturated industry that's failing was a challenge. So we had a lot of L's. We went to a lot of ventures places and got a lot of no's. And we also faced a lot of sort of face value shutdowns of we're in the Boston ecosystem coming at it from Northeastern. We're competing against other people who are coming at it from Harvard or MIT. And so we got a lot of that sort of residual, like we get pushed off to the side. We don't taken as seriously. We don't get put to the table. And so it was resilience. You have to be resilient and keep going and don't take no for an answer, especially when you're, so passionate about something. So I will say that the losses are high. You get a lot of losses, a lot of failures, but we kept at it. We were fundraising for over a year before we closed our round.
Fabulous. Thanks so much. Great note to end on here. I want to thank everybody for your time. I know we're about a minute over and I want to respect everybody's schedules. I want to thank our panelists, as well as my co-hosts, College of Science and Health Sciences entrepreneurs, along with the Center for Research Innovation, who helped this panel happen. We hope to host many more of these in the future, so stay tuned. And if you have any questions for any of us today, please reach out. I know Vance is going to share contact information in the chat for those of you who want to copy it down, but you can find us all on LinkedIn. Our LinkedIn information was in the invites that we sent prior to this conversation today. Thank you, Vance. We'll leave this conversation up a bit longer for those folks who want to copy down our contact information. And thank you again for joining the call. We appreciate you and hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much.
For hosting. Yeah.
Thank you.